So, I'm Andy Gordon with 350 Massachusetts and the Better Future Project. I am the grassroots co-chair of the Coalition for a Clean Energy Future.
I'm Stephen Levy. I'm a member of Citizens Climate Lobby and 350.org in the Massachusetts chapter.
My name is David Radue. I'm a mechanical engineer at MIT Lincoln Laboratory, and in my part-time or off-time, I am the chair of the North Shore chapter of Citizens Climate Lobby. When people use gasoline or natural gas or coal, that there's a chemical reaction, right? And that causes a specific gas, CO2, to enter the atmosphere.
Say, well, CO2 levels have been high, in our past, but this is, as I understand, is a little different because we are making changes 1,000 times or 10,000 times faster than what the planet is accustomed to in its history.
So the basics of a carbon fee, as offered in the state of Massachusetts, the kind of architect bill that you're looking at is offered by Senator Barrett the past 2 terms, so really since 2012. So the current number for the last term would be 1747, an act combating climate change. The whole point, the whole messaging behind a carbon fee is you want to hold polluters, including us, not just big businesses, but everyone living in the system, accountable for the actual cost of the pollution that we generate. So higher sea levels, invasive diseases, things that naturally occur as a result of climate change. Those have direct monetary consequences that most consumers, most polluters aren't paying. So BP and Chevron and Exxon and utility companies aren't paying for increased costs of childhood asthma. They're not paying for property damage and homeowner insurance along the coast of Massachusetts. They're not paying for they are not paying for the cost of what they're putting out. And we're not paying the full cost as people who buy gasoline, as someone who buys home heating oil. It's me, I live in Brighton, Massachusetts, and I just filled up my tank for the winter, which was not cheap. But if I was paying the full cost of the pollution that I am emitting, I would be paying a lot more than the $500 to fill up my tank. So the point is, we want to be able to shift folks away from costly fossil fuel pollution towards renewable energy. The whole point of a carbon fee isn't just reducing emissions, it's helping to incentivize the shift towards renewable energy by thinking about by changing how we think about the cost of fossil fuels. Basics is, once you've collected that fee money, once it's been assessed from those companies, the whole point is then that money gets redistributed evenly, at least in the Massachusetts version of the bill, for businesses, it's share of full-time employment, and then for individuals, it's by member of household. But the whole point is, people who emit more fossil fuels, the folks who can afford to transition, and the businesses that afford to transition, can do so, whereas lower income populations who are not going to have larger homes, who are not going to own multiple vehicles, actually come out ahead under most versions of a carbon fee. But a full carbon fee, I think the thing that folks kind of miss often with electrical generation is that that's not where most of our emissions are coming from. And if this is an emissions problem, what we really have to do is find an equitable, and this is the key word, and Dave raised a really good word, in fairness, an equitable way to deal with home heating, and the really big one's transportation. Oh my goodness, is transportation the big one.
When you put a fee on these fuels, as you'd expect, the price will go up for everyone across the economy, and that will drive demand down. People will use less. But what do you do with the money? And this is the part that's really cool. If you take the money and you give it back to households, or in the case of the state bill, you give some back to households and some back to businesses, you are protecting them from the increased costs, right? At the end of the month, your bank account is protected because you're getting as much back as you're putting in for the average person.
So there's a couple different campaigns that are happening across the country to try and enact a carbon fee. Massachusetts would be the first carbon fee and rebate system in the United States of America. Vermont, Rhode Island is trying to move forward.
Oh, really?
And Washington has a rather contentious ballot amendment because the community, the advocacy community is kind of split over this revenue issue, which is also why the statewide coalition has been very clear, whatever is politically viable and works best for Massachusetts families, that's what we're moving with.
When you say statewide coalition, what does that mean?
So that once again is the Coalition for a Clean Energy Future. I'm the grassroots kind of co-chair of the committee, so handling all of our member-based organizations that want to do work out in the field, both in terms of educating their legislators, making actions, public, raising awareness, that kind of thing. That's the work that I help coordinate. So if people are interested in being a part of that work,
It's called the
Coalition for a Clean Energy Future. Yep.
Coalition for, and I guess it's a long URL.
If you put in Coalition for a Clean Energy Future in Google,
It'll come up.
it'll come up. I think if you're looking for different member organizations besides CCL and 350 Mass, Clean Water Action, the Sierra Club, the Climate Action Business Association, as I mentioned before, Massachusetts Climate Action Network, a bunch of groups from across the state have really kind of pulled together, more than 50 members have pulled together to make this a really powerful kind of push forward. When we actually had, when carbon pricing, when Senator Barrett's bill had its first hearing in the, actually last fall, right before Thanksgiving, they put it in one of the smaller, medium-sized hearing rooms. People had to literally, we were overflowing out into the hall. There were so many people who came and testified in support. It was an overflow. I was actually sitting in the room. It was unbearably hot.
So the next activity at the State House is going to appear after the first year?
Yes. So
Did they have anything on the schedule yet, or is it that's all going to start happening in January?
So there's a difference between what the coalition is doing to prepare for the new legislative term than what the actual deadlines around the new legislative term is. So legislation will be refiled in January. So Senator Barrett will almost certainly refile his carbon pricing bill, and anyone else who would like to put forward a carbon pricing bill can do so at that time. We're willing to work with anybody who wants to do so, but we want to get something passed. In the meantime, what the coalition will be doing between now and then is recruiting local advocates to get engaged in Senate districts across the state, to work with both their senators and their state reps, to further educate them on the issue, and so that they're not just hearing from advocates on Beacon Hill, but they're actually hearing, as Dave said, from their constituents, the people who are really their board, who can vote them out.
I have a question. What is the window of time? How much time have we got before the elected officials say, "Well, we're done"? When exactly does it start? When do they start thinking and working on it, and when does it end?
So after the election, most folks. So to give people a little bit of context, we'll do Mass Civics 101, and I'm from Ohio. I had to learn it too, pretty quickly. But so every even-numbered year, because everyone's on 2-year terms, the legislature essentially ends its formal session at the end of July, goes into informal session where only minor things get passed. You're not supposed to pass big controversial things. We have our election. It's in that little period between November and January that folks will probably be taking, by folks I mean legislators, will be taking either meetings with advocates, constituents, to kind of set what their priorities are moving forward. But really, once things get pushed forward, we're still looking at co-sponsors. If you're a member of the Senate, you can not only file a piece of legislation at any time, you can jump on as a co-sponsor at any time. So trying to both up that co-sponsor number once the bill actually gets filed in January, make sure it has a really robust showing again right out the gates, as well as do the same kind of local awareness that we're doing right here. I mean, people talk about house parties that the constituents can kind of have to educate each other on the issue. These kinds of like grassroots tactics, whether it's that or community forums or just 5-person meetings with legislators, that's what moves people.
So this would be something really good to talk about on Thanksgiving when you have all your relatives there.
Oh, after
need something to talk about.
After this presidential election, I don't know if I want to go to Thanksgiving this year. I got a number of conservative family members.
No way.
But carbon pricing would be something.
Carbon pricing is appealing to many people across the political spectrum. So
Now that's the segue I've been waiting for.
That is the segue.
So let's talk about
I've
this.
been waiting.
So let's talk about this nationally, right? Why this bill? Why this kind of policy? And we've talked about the fact that it doesn't hurt the economy, the fact that it provides jobs, there's some job growth, the fact that it has a huge impact on emissions, and the philosophical argument that it is fair. That what you're doing is saying, we're going to charge for the damage caused by using fossil fuels. If you use more than the average, you're kind of paying extra for the fact that you're doing more damage than most people. If you use less than the average, you're encouraged to continue to do that because you're going to get a little more money in your pocket. Right? So there's a big philosophical fairness argument that I think is very important. When I describe those things to either political party, conservatives or liberals, or anyone in between, there's a lot that sounds really good there. And in fact, this policy is built on ideas from both political parties. If you look nationally at people who champion it, let's talk about some examples of people. Economists from all over the place. Why do economists like it? Because they see the problem as emissions are bad, and what's the fastest way to drive down emissions? Let's pay for them. Right? If we look at the economic systems, putting a price on something bad is a really effective way to make people use less of it. So they like it because from an economic standpoint it works really well.
It's the same reason why we have out-of-pocket costs for healthcare. You want to reduce usage of something, you make it more expensive.
Second group of people that really like it, religious leaders, surprisingly. If you ask, let's say, Pope John Paul II, who came out with a big climate document a year ago.
The encyclical, whatever.
The encyclical. Yes. And in the encyclical, he was like, I kind of like carbon pricing. Like there were words in there in Latin that said, I like carbon pricing, right? For exactly that same fairness argument. If you look at businesses, let me give you two examples of businesses. One, Elon Musk, who is the president of Tesla Motors, but also SpaceX, right? Big entrepreneur, investment guy, really doing interesting technology in the clean technology sector. He went to Paris last year and said, we should put in a revenue neutral carbon price. Now, opposite him, large oil companies, ExxonMobil and Statoil, right? People who you might think would not be advocates for this, said, if we're going to combat climate change, the best policy is a revenue neutral carbon price. So when you've got both ends of the energy industry saying this is the right path forward, you've got religious leaders, you've got economists, you've got a large body of people saying this is the right thing to do. The gap, the thing that's missing, is our political system. Right?
The will.
Politicians are the people who are behind, and there are a couple of reasons they're behind. One, dialogue about climate change has been so poisonous for so long. It's been so polarized where one side and the other side, they take opposite positions. And it's not, how are we going to fix this problem? It's, is this a problem? Right? We've had so much dialogue for years that's all about, is climate change real? And what's it going to do? And how much is it going to cost? And people aren't talking about how do we fix it.
I notice when I'm talking with people who have difficulty understanding or believing climate change is a problem, when I say to them, if it didn't cost us anything to fix, would we be talking about it? And their answer is, of course not. Most of the time.
And that's the point.
Well, no, of course not. If it's not going to cost anything, I don't have any problems with it. So if you can have something that costs nothing or, in fact, is a benefit, I think maybe you got a shot at getting it done.
One of the reasons for having a conversation like this is to make people aware that there is a solution that doesn't hurt their pocketbooks. Now, I'm going to be upfront honest. There is no policy ever enacted by any government that didn't have a loser. Right? Winners and losers are a function of very complicated systems where you make changes. It's just what happens. Right? But this is the kind of policy where the people who are losing out, the industries that are losing out, are the industries that are causing damage. So of course we want those industries to move away from what they're doing. We want to use less fossil fuels.
Well, there's another aspect to why it's attractive. It's attractive, I think, because it's not based on a complex labyrinth of laws, which are difficult to navigate. It's based on very simple numerical concepts, percentage, which everybody understands, and that people understand charts and tables, and they can deal with that more easily than laws which have to be adjudicated and go to court and could take years before you figure out exactly what the impact is. And the impact could be nothing, or it could be significant. Your business could suffer greatly from it.
And the labyrinth here, from the mass perspective, is making sure that we do this without affecting the good regulations that we already have on the books. So I think some folks would look at this as an opportunity to scale back regulations. I've heard some people float the idea of using the money from a rebate to reimburse folks for the money they pay into the Energy Efficiency Trust Fund, which doesn't sound like a great idea considering what we want to do with one, with rebates, and two, with money from the Energy Efficiency Trust Fund. The other question here, and this is going to be the big question, which is why if this ever became a ballot issue, I think we would have questions. One of the big things that we heard from both utilities and from Spectra and Kinder Morgan during the pipeline fights of this past year, and especially from the Associated Industries of Massachusetts, was, if we do not have some kind of ratepayer tariff, essentially forcing electrical ratepayers to pay for a new gas pipeline, electrical costs are going to soar. We're going to have to deal with incredibly high energy prices, and essentially as an almost a tacit threat to the legislature. You don't want to have to deal with that. That's bad. That you will be hearing from your constituents about that. So do not block a ratepayer tariff. The problem was that the Attorney General shredded that argument pretty effectively over the past year. I think what would be thrown in terms of a political narrative at a carbon price would be a similar thing around energy prices, which doesn't bear out the same way. And also, as we've said, we want to increase those prices a little bit, if only so that we can protect populations and shift us away from the things that are hurting us. That's the nature of markets.
Now, to segue nationally, could the same thing happen nationally? Well, I'll be honest, I'd rather have a national bill than a Massachusetts bill, because the goal is to get everyone to move away from fossil fuels. Right?
And to be clear, same thing with us. I think it's ultimately that we're looking at a mass bill the same way that Massachusetts looked at healthcare, looking at a Massachusetts carbon price is equivalent to Romney Care, which showed kind of a proof of concept for a national Affordable Care Act. So this is in many ways kind of where we're seeing this moving.
Former Governor Romney would appreciate you calling it Romney Care.
I think the media took care of that one for him.
So nationally, like I said earlier, for a long time between the two political parties, there was just no bridge between the two to start a conversation, just to have a conversation about if this were a real problem, how would we fix it? Right? It was never about how do we fix it. It's about these two sides. That has started to break down. And it has started to break down because of, among other things, citizen advocates like myself who are going to our members of Congress and saying, look, we've got a big problem. It's your responsibility to talk about solutions. It's your responsibility to figure out what are our options here. And in the last year, a number of Republicans in Congress have stepped up to say, you know what? Climate change is a big deal, and we need to shift the conversation. Representative Carlos Curbelo, who's a representative from Miami, not surprisingly, his constituents are concerned about climate change because of the impacts of sea level rise on that city, which are super bad, and there are similar risks in Boston because of how close we are and low we are to the water.
Not just on Boston, the North Shore and the Cape, too. I mean,
absolutely.
You want to talk about what property damage would look like as a result of sea level rise. I mean, good luck finding parking on Cape Cod in 30 years.
So the point is that kind of pressure from constituents where they're calling them up and saying, hey, you've got to do something about this, caused Carlos Curbelo to take a position. He then helped get a group of 13 other members of the House of Representatives, Republicans, to agree to sign a piece that says we are going to work toward a climate solution. It's not actually taking action. It's just committing to do something, committing to have dialogue. That was followed last spring by the formation of a bipartisan committee in the House of Representatives that is strictly bipartisan. Means for every member that is a Democrat, there is one Republican. And if you want to join, you have to bring someone with you.
Oh, that's great.
That bipartisan group was formed specifically to start conversations about solutions. And turns out the very first meeting they had last spring, they invited Statoil to come, and Statoil said, we want a revenue neutral carbon price.
That's incredible.
So this is something that is in conversation on Capitol Hill.
How do I buy stock in this?
Well, see, that's the thing that's so nice is you can't, right? There's no specific company that wins.
Yeah, that's the thing, yeah.
In any way, the barrier now, the burden now, is on people like us, people like the audience, to talk to their members, to have conversations with their friends, with their family members, and say, hey, what do you guys think about this? Is this, if we've got to fix climate change, what are our options? Hey, this one looks pretty good. What are the things that are wrong with this? What are the problems here? And can we fix them? And if you look at the weaknesses of this bill, you'll find it's pretty robust. These concepts are pretty strong, which is why so many groups and so many thought leaders support them.
Well, it's being adopted, seems like it's going to get adopted widely throughout Europe. So we will have some numbers, some hard numbers about how the effects of how would it affect our economy. Can you tell us anything about how different regions would be affected? Or some regions are going to win, some are going to lose. Hopefully we're going to be at the top of the winners, but can you give us a kind of a preview as who comes out doing well with this and who might not do quite as well?
So if you look at a national policy, the thing I want to stress is those states, those regions that lose out, which are primarily the places around the country where you're drilling fossil fuels, where you're digging them up. That's the industry that's going to lose out, and so that's the sector that
Dakotas.
So the Dakotas, Oklahoma, North Texas, these are places that are hurt the most. The amount they are hurt is a fraction of 8%, like 0.1% of their economic impact, or of their total economic situation. Why is that? Well, that revenue recycling, by giving the money back to households and protecting them, that is the mechanism that ensures that the economy as a whole can move toward these other sectors, can spend money in a way that's productive. And so, yes, there are a handful of places around the country that would lose out, but frankly, they don't lose very much. And when you consider the amount of emissions that's reduced, it's a pretty good return.
I think
everywhere else comes out ahead.
I think the people in the fossil fuel production states are aware of the fact of how risky their economic future is. If you're strip mining coal or offshore oil, you got to be aware of the fact that the future of that is somewhat risky, and getting out of that business might be a good idea for a long-term. That might be a good long-term investment.
I think you're seeing that play out with the pipeline companies right now.
Really?
Oh, definitely. Between what has happened since the Access Northeast project that's been proposed coming through Massachusetts as well as up through Maine, where that is kind of run into roadblocks, that affects not only the return on investment for investors in Spectra Energy, but job prospects for those people employed by the company, because it is such a project-to-project based industry.
Yes.
And because there is no guarantee as resistance to these kind of projects and this kind of industry increases, it is beneficial to find the alternative, to find something that's renewable and that will be accepted by local communities with open arms.
So what kind of, I'm curious about the pipeline companies. What kinds of things are they going to be interested in working on? Are they would they adapt to a different industry? What are their plans?
I don't think I could speak intelligently on what their plans are.
Okay. I was just curious.
Yeah, I think it is interesting because pipelines are, I think, the one thing that tends to divide the progressive community a little bit, because we want to show up for frontline communities. We want to show up for our brothers and sisters in the labor movement. And pipelines, perhaps more than anything else, pick winners and losers. And it picks a lot more losers than it picks winners. But because folks who are in pipe fitter unions, who like this is income for them. It divides the community when it shouldn't be divided. The more investment in the transition we make towards renewable energy gets us out of those fights and gets us a little bit more unified.
Now, I'll be again fully honest. When you look at, for example, concern about coal communities, right? What's going to happen to coal communities? Like, that's a real problem. There's a real economic concern there. And this bill isn't designed to fix that concern, because that is a specific region that requires specific alternate government actions. There are other things that people need to do. That this bill, by deliberately trying to be as broad and as simple as possible, isn't going to be able to protect those specific locations. But the fact of the matter is that coal is moving away regardless, because coal is not inexpensive enough. There are other cheaper forms of energy. And so whether these policies are in place or not, the day of peak coal is still gone, and it's still going to move away. All these do is help allow a transition for all of us to better, cleaner cleaner energy sources and away from fossil fuels that will protect against the other damage of climate change.
Indeed. What he said.
Yeah.
So to finish up, the last thing I'd like to leave you with is that both the state and the national proposals are trying to do the exact same kind of things, right? They're designed to be a simple mechanism to help make businesses and make individuals more empowered in their buying choices, so that they are buying energy that doesn't cause the damage that fossil fuels cause. And over the long term, that's a transition we have to make. And the reason that we advocate for these policies is they do it not only very effectively in terms of how much we reduce emissions, but they do it while protecting the economy. And specifically, there are ways to protect low-income households, those people who are most vulnerable to the kinds of changes that are going to happen in the economy. This gives them the money to make those changes. And it does it at the same time by being fair, because people are paying not based on arbitrary thresholds, but based on how much damage they're causing. Right? If you want to use more fuel, you should pay for the damage you're causing. And so there is a fairness argument, there is an economic argument, there is a social justice argument where we can protect low-income households, and there's the environmental argument. And for all of those arguments, the key that we need is just getting our politicians to take some action, to have more dialogue, and to move forward on this kind of bill. And the way we can get there is by getting the public to talk about it more.
Maybe social media is the way to do it?
I think it is old style organizing, honestly. It's person-to-person contact, because what moves folks in the legislature, folks will often talk about the threat of being ousted or primary to re-election. Honestly, what moves people, I've seen the most in Massachusetts, is making something a personal issue. So it's not just, hey, I'm Andy from 350 Massachusetts. It's going to my representative saying, hey, I live over off of Market Street, and I go to these community events. I'm a member of your community. This is something that matters to me. And by the way, I brought 5 of my friends who are also from the district. It's that kind of hard work that makes it personal. That where it's not just talking about climate.
It's sort of your traditional grassroots approach.
Exactly, because that's the only thing that's worked. Honestly,
really,
that is the grassroots from resistance to just your good structured basic community organizing. That's what moves the needle here.
Dinner parties and people coming over people's houses and
exactly
talking about it.
It's that kind of mobilization. It's that kind of building over time that pushed back a pipeline tax here in Massachusetts this past year, that pushed for a better omnibus energy bill. It's what's worked in the past on just about everything else. I mean, from healthcare and cost control in 2012, when we passed.
Do petitions are those beneficial to the kind you sign up online for? Or that?
I think honestly, what legislators need to hear is not just that signature, or see is not just that signature, but multiple points of contact. So it's and as Dave is
letter writing, phone calls.
Definitely, and also showing up. Visiting or scheduling, even better yet, doing it in district. Having a community meeting with your legislator in district to
Many legislators have town meetings. I know my legislators do visit every so often different.
They have office hours. Many of them, if not all of them, have office hours.
Yeah, that is true. You just drop in with a group of people to visit with them.
And really ask questions, because this isn't just a showing up with pitchforks and torches and say, we want it or else. What you're saying is, and really this is the first meeting.
What kind of questions would be the most influential? What do you mean say ask questions? What do you mean by that?
It's, why do you care about this issue? Help me understand what your concerns are. Because if you're trying to educate someone on an issue, you want to tailor your approach to what their concerns are, and every legislator is different. The concerns of a legislator on the North Shore are very different in many cases than the concerns of someone out in the Pioneer Valley or in the Berkshires. So it behooves constituents to sit down with their legislators to build a relationship, and by that I mean actually build the time of, so that they can associate your face with the issue that you care about, and that you can, through your own organizing, provide a component of the barometer of how the community feels on an issue. So it's not just Steve Levy of Marblehead, it's Steve Levy who speaks for the local CCL or 350 Mass chapter, and you can provide insight on how constituents are feeling. That's what organizing, that's one of the many benefits of what organizing does. You build people power, you give people, you give legislators a reason to care about what you're talking about. You're doing so in part because you've built enough people, you've brought enough people together, as Dave's kind of alluded to, that they have to care. That it is their job to respond to their constituents. So really what it is, it falls onto the shoulders of grassroots advocates and organizers to build that people power, to give them a reason to care. Because it's not that they don't agree with us. Even the more moderate to conservative members of the Democratic Party in Massachusetts and the Republican Party agree that climate change is the thing that we have to deal with. But the question is how we deal with it. And they have multiple priorities on their plate, and the building is incredibly siloed. So getting something through really is about building that political will with the people who make a lot of the decisions. And that's showing up and bringing people and building that positive moving forward relationship.
And I'll go one step further when we look at the national picture. Let's say you're a person at home and you aren't an advocate. Right? That's not something that gets you excited. You don't feel compelled to call up your legislator. Right? But if you have a conversation with your friends and someone's talking about energy prices, and you say, hey, I heard about a way that we can combat climate change that doesn't hurt our economy. Right? People's ears perk up. That's, what are you talking about? I haven't heard of that. Just spreading the word that there is a solution that's worth considering. Right? That we should be talking about this solution, right? And maybe that leads to a bunch of dialogue about exactly the details of the solution. And I'm happy to have conversations about that. But getting to that point where it's not a fear, where it's not either hopelessness, we can't possibly deal with climate change, it's too big, or fear that the government's going to come and take our money and they're going to misuse it, or something like that. If you can get it into a conversation about, we have a problem, there are ways to fix it, there are ways to fix it that are fair and effective. Right? Shifting it into a positive solution mode instead of a negative, oh, there's nothing we can do mode. That, and again, with family, with friends, with colleagues, just having a little bit of that dialogue to move it from a toxic political topic to a topic that has hope. That kind of shift in attitude can then work its way up the political system and get our leaders to be thinking optimistically about how they can fix it.
And that kind of model, that additional kind of spreading, raising awareness amongst the people that are most likely to receive your message, your friends and families, that's where social media is actually very important.
Oh, is it?
I mean, in terms of sharing information and effectively sharing graphics, videos, Robert Reich has a great video on carbon pricing, both a revenue neutral and revenue positive.
This is something good for Facebook and
Something great for Facebook. That kind of stuff, either through following CCL or the Coalition for Clean Energy Future. Follow those campaigns, and we'll provide you with everything that you need. But the big thing that I think you're kind of getting at is you want to be able to reach out to the people, and the scenario that Dave painted points to this as well. You're a cultural broker with your own little group of people. They're going to receive a message because it comes from you. We live in an age where people will discredit sources simply based on the company that it comes from the source of information they don't agree with, but at least they will take it seriously if it comes from you because you've built the relationship. Same thing, the same kind of principle that kind of underlines how you go about building a relationship with your legislator or with your local city councilor. Same thing for your friends and family. You're just sharing information because you have a reason to care, you've put a story to it, and they trust you. You've built a relationship. So offer information.
How do we get this story into the news?
So this is a longer conversation about media strategy potentially, but I think honestly it is making sure that your local newspaper, and I'll speak for the statewide campaign, and I'll let Dave speak a little bit more for the national campaign. You want to give them something to cover. And in this case, that means if there's a hearing on the bill, making sure that whether you attend or you read about it, that you make sure that there's even just a letter to the editor or an ability to do an op-ed, ensuring that people have awareness of it is important. It's if you want to go about social media, it's sharing or tweeting a mass live article about progress that the bill has made or about carbon pricing in general. Commonwealth Mag does great stuff on different kinds of climate policy and energy policy and does a little bit longer exposés. But it's making sure that information is out there both in your kind of local media little nest or locus and then doing what you can to get it a little bit more regional. Yeah, there's a bunch of different ways to do that, and I think it's a much longer conversation around media strategy though.
So CCL advocates strongly for letters to the editor and building relationships with newspapers. Also social media, of course, using Facebook and Twitter as a mouthpiece to communicate to friends and family and colleagues. We also strongly support kind of town halls and community meetings, and then talking with elected officials at all scales. So going to your city council, going to your city councilor who lives 5 blocks away and saying, hey, are you aware of this? What do you think about this? How does it affect the city?
Would you sponsor a resolution in favor?
Would you be willing to talk about this with the city council and maybe get the city of Salem to pass a resolution that says we'd like the state to take some action on this. We would like our representatives, we'd like our state senators to be thinking about this. We'd like them to move on this because we at the local level are feeling sea level rise. We at the local level are feeling impacts, and we're concerned about it.
Yeah.
So that those are the kinds of things that we support in media. And then the other thing I would say, and Andy made this point clearly, personal narratives are important. If I tell you, and I clearly can do this, a story about detailed numbers and facts and figures of this detailed analysis that some mathematical guy did, that may or may not excite you. Excites me, it doesn't excite everyone. But if I tell you that I am an avid birder and I like to go up to Plum Island and I know that climate change is significantly affecting the birds that live there, the birds that migrate down, and because people have done analysis, people have done studies of this, and I know that I'm not seeing the same birds I used to see, and I'm worried my kids won't be able to enjoy the hobby the way I do because the environment is changing, and that impacts me personally, right? If you can tell those kinds of stories, personal ways that people are affected by the cost of their house insurance because sea level rise is affecting the way insurance are charging them things, or my child's asthma, I'm concerned about air quality, or whatever local impacts you feel or personal impacts you feel. That kind of thing is what gets people engaged that's what, instead of turning off the brain, that's what gets people thinking, oh, I can remember that.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that resonates with me. I recognize that.
It gives an emotional context for the numbers. Like, for example, what a story that I would tell often when advocating for a stronger offshore wind procurement.
Mm-hmm.
Some of my best friends in the state are from New Bedford, Massachusetts, down on the South Coast. That has been waiting and prepping for to be an offshore wind manufacturing kind of zone for a long time. Never been until I moved here. I'd never been to New Bedford in my life. And they brought me down and they showed me around town every single summer and fell in love with it. And being able to say, this town that has negative connotations with it, this could be where the next generation of mechanical engineers from UMass Dartmouth come from and stay and do work and re-energize and rebuild this town that has a tremendous amount of pride. That being able to say that not only is this wind turbine beautiful, it's a sign of rejuvenation, and you can empower that. You can make that real for this town.
Has there been any outreach to teachers around the state?
So,
Because I visit community colleges, and I'm also a substitute teacher. I find that students today are very interested in this. They're, I would say, more interested than the general population. They see that the future is going to be for them, and they want to do something. So I was just wondering what kind of outreach there's been to teachers and school boards and colleges.
So in colleges, there's actually a very strong student divestment movement in Massachusetts. The Better Future Project, the umbrella organization that supports 350 Massachusetts, has done a lot of support work with. So there's a lot of engagement and kind of cross-pollination between folks that are involved in that section of the movement, who might eventually move over into carbon pricing advocacy, or at least whatever is politically viable at the time. They're willing to show up for that fight. That was definitely true in fighting the pipeline tax this past year. I think one of to a little bit more directly answer your question, I've had a number of friends who are educators start to develop their own kind of climate change curriculum around educating their students around how to think about climate change or how to approach the problem. I don't think that we have directly approached school boards or teachers yet. I think we're trying to shore up a broader base of support on top of the already pretty broad base that we already have first. But it sounds like a great idea.
Yeah, I know teachers they need lesson plans every so often. And so having a lesson plan all packaged ready to go might be a good thing to have available for teachers in the state.
There's an organization known as ACE that does a lot of climate education regionally and in the state of Massachusetts that does this kind of after-school education for kids. So maybe not directly through teachers, but through after-school programs. This is something that's kind of popping up a little bit more. But definitely, if 8th graders or high schoolers want to sit through an hour of statewide energy policy, I'm sure we can find a way to make it fun.
Well, actually, they may. My experience has been if there's clay involved, and crayons or coloring, this is very attractive. And amazingly, high school students really enjoy the clay as much or more than younger elementary school students. They really like the clay and modeling and doing something with their hands, because they don't get much of a chance to do much in high school. It's very clerical.
And studying for the SAT.
Studying for the SAT. They don't get a chance to actually have any fun.
So if I were looking at a school setting, let's say not a college setting, kindergarten through high school, climate change, just awareness. What does that word mean, right? What's happening? Oh, chemistry is changing in the air. What are the effects of that? What are the secondary effects of those effects? Right? There's just making people aware of the problem and that it is a real problem that needs to be addressed, I think is kind of concern number one, point number one. The second thing I would do that looks at these policies is to frame it not just as a daunting problem, but as a problem that needs solutions, right? An opportunity. What could we do? What is the solution space? To shift the conversation away from, okay, we've got this really big issue, to how do we tackle it? What are our options? Right? I feel like students in particular are good at creative thinking, and creative thinking is something that schools don't necessarily encourage as much as they should. They aren't built for. So doing educational modules that are encouraging people to brainstorm, to understand, okay, what's the real problem? The real problem is CO2 going in the air, okay? What are the ways we could fix it? Well, we could take CO2 out of the air. We could put less into the air. We could keep the amount that's going in the air going in and just deal with the consequences, right? Doing that kind of exercise to think through, how do we tackle a big problem? What are the ways we fix a big problem? I think that's the thing that is perhaps the biggest opportunity in education. Because, again, it shifts the dialogue towards solutions, and it shifts the dialogue toward excitement and energy. And that is the thing that we need most in this conversation nationally.
UMass Lowell has actually done a lot of great work around setting up engineering students working on climate solutions. One of which, I think one of the modules they discuss is a carbon price. So at least in the state of Massachusetts, there's a shift at all levels, at least beginning to occur towards a little bit more climate education, and at least in higher education, some touching of carbon pricing.
Has anyone built any simulations, any gaming kind of environments for this?
An interactive choose your own adventure. So you pick the buttons, you set thresholds, and you see what happens.
Well, you know, simulation is very useful for airline pilots.
I would love it for you to do that. That's not a skill that we have in the advocacy community.
That is definitely not a skill I have.
But what has been done... I bring it up because I actually know people that actually build these kinds of simulators, urban planning simulators.
Yep.
They're very effective, very useful, and I think maybe incorporating this into urban planning simulations might be not as difficult as you might think, and may be very useful in visualizing what the outcomes might be, so that people can see. Because sometimes this can be very theoretical, and actually seeing something happening, even though it's a simulation, might make it a little more concrete for people.
I think you're onto something there, in part because like we have done a lot, we'll continue to do a lot of economic modeling. I think as Dave has made very, very clear. We've done a lot of economic modeling, but making a vision for that, being able to create a narrative around that, a campaign narrative around that, especially, I mean, regardless for carbon pricing, it's difficult. For a revenue neutral carbon price, it's not always the easiest thing. The fairness narrative is there, the accountability narrative is there, but talking about how our communities will change over time, getting away from the systemic to painting that vision of what your community will look like once that full fee has gone into effect, that could be a really powerful narrative. But pushing that forward, I think, is something that all of our campaigns have to do a little bit more work on.
It might be worth contacting the engineering schools, and we have so many in this. We're very lucky to have so many engineering schools in this area. That might be a good thing to contact them and see if they've done anything or thought about it.
So I'll say this. MIT's Media Lab and some other kind of offshoots of MIT have looked at, for lack of a better word, gamification. Right? Using games, especially what's called serious games. Games that are built as educational tools to teach serious topics. It happens the place I work, Lincoln Laboratory, which is a government research laboratory, has done a lot of work with Homeland Security, doing serious games for fighting wildfires. Right? Scenario planning. How do you deploy people? How do you deploy resources? In the same kind of way, having models that were like, as an example, here's the Earth, and then tinker with these parameters and look at how CO2 changes affect the Earth. Or here's a model of the state of Massachusetts, and look at how different proposals and experiment with, have knobs to turn and tweak to try and come up with the best policy that reduces emissions while improving the economy,
employment,
and giving people a chance to kind of explore that space. I think that would be a very powerful tool. So if you know someone who is interested in making tools, we would be happy to talk with them.
I think the other question is then find who pays for that, but that may be not as complicated as getting someone to pay for that might be possible.
Kurt Schilling got the Rhode Island taxpayers to attempt to pay for this thing.
Thank you very much for coming tonight, and
Yeah.
Yeah, if you want to find out more about this, we should visit the websites for Citizens Climate Lobby or
The Coalition for a Clean Energy Future or 350 Massachusetts. We usually have some good carbon pricing stuff up.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
How diet affects land use. Meat eaters eat meat. A hamburger is an example. This circle represents 1.2 hectares, or 3 acres of cropland. If you're a meat eater, you're going to need this much land for a year to eat. Vegetarians do not eat meat, but they do eat cheese. That's a cheese pizza. From the same amount of land, 1.2 hectares, 3 acres, you could feed 6 vegetarians for a year. Vegans don't eat animal products. They eat carrots, fruits, vegetables, nuts. On the same circle, which is 3 acres or 1.2 hectares, you could feed 18 vegans for a year. Which meat has the smallest carbon footprint? Is it the cow, the chicken, the fish, the pig, the sheep? And there's the earth. This chart shows the amount of CO2 equivalent per kilogram of meat that's produced when you make 1 kilogram of meat. So lamb is the biggest, 20, beef is 15, pork is 5, salmon is 4, and chicken is 2. So chicken is about 7 times less CO2 produced than beef. So the winner is chicken. Only 2 kilograms of CO2 equivalent are emitted for every kilogram of chicken produced. So have a chicken and save on the amount of CO2 you produce. Carbon fee and dividend is a market-based way to reduce carbon emissions that cause climate change. There are only 2 elements: collecting a fee on carbon-based fuels and then returning most of the fee to the general public, minus administrative costs. This is an oil well in the picture. The oil producer will charge an extra fee to the purchasers of oil. Looks like a tax. We could call it a carbon tax, but we're going to call it a carbon fee. And we take all that money, most of it, and give it to the general public, minus a little bit of money you have to pay for administration costs. So before you have carbon fee and dividend, you get $4, you spend $4, you buy 4 items, each costs $1. One is 2 hamburgers, for example, and 2 salads, each cost $1. With carbon fee and dividend, things change a little. You have your $4, and you can buy 2 salads, but you can only buy 1 hamburger because the hamburger has built into it carbon taxes or carbon fees. That's because hamburgers require more fossil fuels to make a hamburger. More oil, more gas. But they're going to give you the money they collected for the tax. They're going to give that back to you as a dividend. And with that dividend, you could buy yourself another salad. So now you have 4 items, 3 salads and 1 hamburger.